Jake Miller stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive towers of Stellar Academy. The buildings reached toward the purple sky of Kepler Prime like giant metal fingers. Students from dozens of different species walked between the towers, their voices creating a strange mix of sounds that Jake had never heard before. He adjusted his simple brown backpack and walked toward the main entrance. Other students towered over him, or floated past him, or scurried around his feet. Some had 4 arms, others had scales instead of skin, and a few seemed to be made of living crystal. Jake looked very ordinary compared to all of them. The academy was known across the galaxy as the best place to learn military tactics and advanced sciences. Only the smartest beings from each species could get in. Jake still could not believe that humans had finally been accepted into the exchange program. He was one of only 3 humans at the entire academy. Inside the main hall, Jake found his first class. The room was huge, with seats designed for many different body types. He picked a spot near the back and sat down quietly. Other students filed in, talking in groups and laughing together. Jake opened his notebook and waited. A tall figure with blue crystalline skin walked into the room. She moved with confidence and carried herself like someone who was used to being the smartest person around. Her name was Zara Veltar, and Jake had read about her in the Academy files. She came from the Altarian homeworld and had the highest grades in tactical analysis. Zara sat in the front row with a group of other advanced students. Jake noticed how they all seemed to look up to her. She spoke in a clear voice that carried across the room, and others nodded when she made points about their previous lessons. Professor Catherine entered the classroom. He was a centaurian with gray fur and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. He had been teaching at the academy for over 40 years and was respected by students and teachers alike. Today, we will discuss resource scarcity wars, Professor Catherine announced. These conflicts happen when different species fight over limited materials or territory. Who can give me an example of how such wars typically develop? Several hands shot up. Zara was called on first. She stood and spoke about the mineral wars of the outer sector, explaining how poor planning and emotional decisions led to unnecessary conflict. Her analysis was detailed and impressive. Very good, Miss Veltar, Professor Catherine said. Now, how might such conflicts be prevented? Jake raised his hand slowly. Professor Catherine looked surprised but nodded at him. Yes, Mr. Miller. Jake stood up. Most resource wars start because people are afraid, he said in a quiet voice. Fear makes them grab for things before thinking about sharing. If you can show people that working together gets them more than fighting, they usually choose cooperation. The room went quiet. Some students looked interested, but Zara turned in her seat to stare at Jake with a cold expression. That is a very simple view, Zara said without being called on. Humans always think that basic emotions explain everything. Real strategic thinking requires understanding complex political and economic factors. Miss Veltar, please wait to be recognized, Professor Catherine said gently. I apologize, Professor, Zara said. But I think we should consider the source of that opinion. Humans have only been in space for a few hundred years. They have spent most of their history fighting each other over resources. Perhaps they are not the best species to advise others on preventing conflicts. A few students laughed quietly. Jake felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression calm. He sat back down and continued taking notes. Mr. Miller makes a valid point about the psychological aspects of conflict, Professor Catherine said. Fear and misunderstanding do play important roles in how wars begin. Miss Veltar, your analysis of political factors is also correct. Both perspectives have value. Zara nodded, but Jake could see she was not satisfied. She kept glancing back at him during the rest of the class. When the lesson ended, Jake packed his things slowly. He could hear Zara talking to her friends near the front of the room. Did you see how he just repeated basic human thinking? Zara said. They always talk about emotions and feelings instead of real analysis. No wonder their species is so behind the rest of us." Her friend, a tall insectoid student, clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Why did the Academy even accept humans? They have nothing to offer that we have not already learned." Jake finished packing and walked toward the door. As he passed Zara's group, she spoke loud enough for him to hear. "I heard that humans only got accepted because the Galactic Council felt sorry for them. They wanted to help a primitive species catch up to the rest of civilization." Jake stopped walking for a moment. He turned and looked at Zara calmly. "Maybe you are right," he said. "We do have a lot to learn here." Zara seemed surprised by his response. She had expected him to argue or get angry. Instead, Jake nodded politely and continued walking. In the hallway, Jake met Lin Xiao, one of the other human students. She had been at the academy for 2 years and came from the Luna colonies. "I heard what happened in class," Lin said. "You should not let Zara push you around like that. She thinks she knows everything." Jake shrugged. "She is probably the smartest student here. I can learn from her, even if she does not want to teach me." Lin shook her head. "You are too nice, Jake. This place will eat you alive if you do not stand up for yourself." Jake smiled. "I will be fine. I am here to learn, not to fight." As they walked to their next class, Jake thought about what Zara had said. She was right, that humans were new to space and had made many mistakes. But he also knew that being new sometimes meant seeing things that others missed. He would keep listening and learning, no matter what anyone said about his species. Professor Catherine watched Jake leave the classroom. The old Centaurian had seen many students over the years, and something about the quiet human interested him. There was a calmness in Jake that seemed unusual for someone so young. It reminded the professor of veteran soldiers he had known, people who had seen difficult things and learned to stay steady under pressure. The next few classes went similarly. Jake participated when asked, but never tried to show off. He took careful notes and asked thoughtful questions. Meanwhile, Zara continued to make comments about human limitations and primitive thinking. Other students began to join in, seeing that Jake would not fight back. By the end of his first week, Jake had become an easy target for anyone who wanted to feel superior. But he continued to study hard and treat everyone with respect. He was here for a reason, and he would not let mockery stop him from achieving his goals. The weeks passed and Zara's treatment of Jake grew worse. She had decided that making the human student look foolish was almost a duty. In every class they shared, she found ways to question his contributions or point out what she called human shortcomings. During advanced tactical studies, Professor Catherine assigned students to work in pairs on battle simulations. Jake was paired with Nyx, a quiet Vexti student who rarely spoke. The Vexti were known for their mathematical minds and logical thinking. "Today you will defend the space station against overwhelming odds," Professor Catherine explained. "Your resources are limited, and you cannot retreat. Show me how you would handle this situation." Jake and Nyx studied the simulation parameters. The enemy had 5 times more ships and better weapons. Most students would try to use standard defensive formations that they had learned in textbooks. "What if we do not fight them where they expect?" Jake suggested to Nyx. Nyx tilted his insect-like head. "Explain. Everyone knows that stations fight from fixed positions. But what if we make them think we are weaker than we are? Let some of their ships get close, then hit them from angles they are not watching." Nyx calculated quickly in his head. "The mathematics are risky. If we miscalculate timing, we lose everything." "Sometimes risk is the only way to win," Jake said quietly. They programmed their strategy into the simulation. Instead of meeting the enemy fleet head-on, they allowed the attackers to approach the station. At the last moment, Jake had hidden ships emerge from the station's blind spots and attack the enemy from behind. The simulation ended with the enemy fleet destroyed and the station intact. Other student pairs had failed or achieved costly victories, but Jake and Nix had won with minimal losses. Zara watched the results with growing irritation. She had expected the human to fail spectacularly, but somehow he had succeeded. "Mr. Miller," Professor Catherine said, "explain your strategy." Jake stood up. "The enemy expected us to fight like we were defending. Instead, we fought like we were hunting. We made them think they were winning until it was too late to escape." "Interesting approach," the professor said. "Where did you learn this tactic?" "I read about similar strategies in historical battles," Jake answered. Zara could not contain herself. "Professor, I must object to this approach. It relies on deception and misdirection rather than proper military doctrine. Any competent enemy would see through such primitive tricks." "Miss Veltar, the simulation results speak for themselves," Professor Catherine replied. "But this is exactly what I mean about human thinking," Zara continued. "They approach everything like barbarians. Real military strategy requires discipline and proven methods, not wild gambles." She turned to address the class. "This is why humans should not be in positions of military leadership. They think like predators instead of civilized beings. Their violent history proves they cannot be trusted with advanced tactics." Jake remained standing calmly. "You might be right," he said, "but the station is still standing." The class laughed, and Zara's blue skin darkened with anger. She had not expected Jake to respond with humor. After class, Zara gathered her usual group of followers. "Did you see how he acted? No respect for proper analysis, no understanding of military theory. He just guessed and got lucky." "Maybe we should report him to the administration," suggested Cree, a Zephyrian student with pale skin and large eyes. "Surely there are standards for student behavior." "No," Zara said thoughtfully. "I have a better idea. Let me show everyone what humans are really like." Over the next week, Zara began organizing study groups that deliberately excluded Jake. She spread rumors about human incompetence and suggested that Jake's presence lowered the quality of education for everyone else. "I heard he comes from some backwater colony," she told anyone who would listen. "Probably never saw real technology until he came here." Jake noticed that fewer students talked to him in the hallways. Some actively avoided him. Lin Zhao tried to defend him, but even she seemed embarrassed by the attention. "You need to do something," Lin told him. "Zara is turning everyone against you." "Let her," Jake replied. "I am here to learn, not to be popular." "But this affects all humans, not just you," Lin argued. "If you make us look weak, it hurts our species' reputation." Jake looked at her seriously. "Our species' reputation should not depend on what one student does at one academy." The situation reached a breaking point during a class called Historical Military Engagements. Professor Catherine was discussing famous battles from galactic history. "Today we will examine the Great Siege of Proxima Station," he announced. "This battle occurred 50 years ago and is considered one of the most brilliant defensive actions in recorded history. The defenders were outnumbered 10-1 but managed to hold their position for 3 months. Zara raised her hand immediately. "Professor, this battle is an excellent example of why proper planning and superior technology defeat primitive tactics. The defenders won because they had better equipment and training, not because of any special strategy." "An interesting perspective, Miss Veltar," Professor Catherine said. "What specific technological advantages did the defenders possess?" Zara stood confidently. They had advanced shield generators that could rotate frequencies to confuse enemy targeting systems. They also used psychological warfare to break enemy morale. "Actually," Jake said quietly, "the defenders' shields were damaged in the first week of the siege, and the psychological warfare was used by the attackers, not the defenders." The class turned to look at Jake. Zara's expression showed surprise and anger. "I am sorry, Mr. Miller, but I have studied this battle extensively, Zara said coldly. The historical records clearly show that superior Altarian technology was the deciding factor. The records also show that the defenders improvised most of their tactics during the battle, Jake replied. They had to adapt constantly because their original plans did not work. Where exactly did you read this? Zara demanded. I have access to the same historical databases as everyone else. I read about it somewhere, Jake said simply. Zara's voice became sharp with frustration. That is not an answer. You cannot just make claims without sources. Miss Veltar, please calm down, Professor Catherine said. But Zara was beyond calm. This is exactly what I have been talking about. Humans make up facts to support their primitive worldview. They cannot accept that other species might be superior to them. She turned to face Jake directly. What backwater human colony are you from anyway? Some frontier world that barely has space travel. That would explain why you know so little about real history. Jake met her gaze steadily. I am from Earth. Earth, Zara repeated mockingly. The human homeworld. How quaint. I suppose that makes you think you are special somehow. No, Jake said quietly. It does not make me special at all. Professor Catherine watched this exchange with growing interest. Something about Jake's responses seemed unusual. The human student showed no anger or defensiveness, even under direct attack. Most young beings would have reacted emotionally to such provocation. Perhaps we should return to the lesson, the professor suggested. Yes, let us return to facts instead of human fantasies, Zara said. She remained standing, clearly energized by her confrontation with Jake. For the rest of the class, Zara continued to challenge every comment Jake made. She questioned his sources, mocked his analysis, and suggested that his presence was lowering the academic standards of the academy. Jake answered each attack calmly and politely. He never raised his voice or showed anger. His responses were brief and thoughtful, which seemed to frustrate Zara even more. By the end of the class, most students were uncomfortable with how aggressive Zara had become. Even her usual supporters looked embarrassed by her behavior. As students filed out of the classroom, Jake gathered his things slowly. He could hear Zara talking to her friends near the door. Did you see how he could not answer basic questions about his sources? This proves what I have been saying about human intellectual capacity. Jake walked past them without looking up. As he reached the door, Zara called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe next time you should stick to subjects that humans can actually understand, like agriculture or basic mathematics. Jake stopped and turned back to look at her. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes that made several students step back. Then his expression returned to its usual calm. You are probably right, he said softly. I have a lot to learn. As Jake left the classroom, Professor Catherine made a decision. There was something about this human student that did not add up. His knowledge of military history was too detailed, his responses under pressure to control. Tomorrow, the professor would begin his own investigation into Jake Miller's background. Professor Catherine sat in his office the next morning, staring at Jake Miller's student file on his computer screen. The information was surprisingly basic for someone attending the most prestigious academy in the galaxy. Name, age, species, home planet. Nothing about family background, previous education, or military service. Most students had detailed records, showing their achievements, test scores, and recommendations. Jake's file looked like it had been scrubbed clean of anything meaningful. The professor had seen similar files before, usually for students with classified backgrounds. He reached for his communication device and contacted the academy's administration office. This is Professor Catherine. I need expanded records for student Jake Miller from Earth. The administrator, a nervous Kellyan with multiple arms, checked his system. I am sorry, Professor. Those records are restricted. You would need special authorization to access them. Restricted. Professor Catherine was surprised. He is just an exchange student. Yes, sir. But the restriction comes from high-level sources. I cannot tell you more than that. The professor ended the call and leaned back in his chair. In 40 years of teaching, he had never encountered a simple exchange student with classified records. Something about Jake Miller was not what it seemed. Meanwhile, Zara was conducting her own investigation. She had recruited Lin Zhao to help her, appealing to Lin's frustration with being associated with Jake's apparent mediocrity. I am tired of other students thinking all humans are like him, Lin said as they sat in the academy's computer lab. Maybe if we can prove he does not belong here, it will help the rest of us. Exactly, Zara agreed. I am not trying to hurt him personally. I just want to show everyone that standards should not be lowered for any species. Lin accessed the human databases from her home colonies. His name is Jake Miller, age 22, from Earth. Let me see what else I can find. She typed rapidly, searching through public records, educational databases, and social networks. After an hour of searching, she looked up with confusion. This is strange, Lin said. There are hundreds of Jake Millers in the databases, but I cannot find any information about our Jake Miller. No school records, no family information, no social media presence. Maybe he is using a false name, Zara suggested. No, his genetic signature matches the Academy's records. He is definitely Jake Miller from Earth, but it is like he did not exist before he came here. Lin tried accessing Earth's military databases, but found that most of Jake's information was sealed. His records are classified under military privacy protocols. That is very unusual for a civilian student. Military protocols. Zara's eyes narrowed. Why would a simple exchange student have military classifications? I do not know, Lin admitted. But something is not right about this. Over the following days, both investigations continued. Professor Catherine used his contacts in the Galactic Education Council to dig deeper into Jake's background. Lin and Zara tried every database they could access, but kept hitting the same walls. During this time, Jake continued to attend classes normally. He seemed unaware of the investigations, or if he knew, he did not show concern. His academic performance remained steady, and he continued to respond to Zara's attacks with calm politeness. In advanced combat simulations, the class was given a rescue mission scenario. Teams of 4 students had to extract civilians from a heavily fortified enemy position while being outnumbered 10 to 1. Most teams were expected to fail or suffer heavy casualties. Jake's team included Nyx, the Vexed Eye, a young Crethary warrior named Brock, and a Zephyrian named Senna. They were not considered one of the stronger teams, especially with a human as their leader. The mission is impossible, Brock said, flexing his 4 muscular arms. We should charge in fast and fight our way out. That will get the civilians killed, Senna replied, her large eyes reflecting worry. We need to be more careful. What do you think, Jake? Nyx asked. Jake studied the simulation parameters carefully. The enemy had superior numbers and defensive positions. Any direct assault would fail, but there was something familiar about the scenario that made him think. We need to make them think we are somewhere else, Jake said finally. If we can get them to move their forces away from the civilians, we can extract them while they are distracted. How do we do that? Brock asked. We make a lot of noise in the wrong place, Jake explained. Draw their attention with a fake assault, while a smaller team gets the civilians out quietly. They programmed their strategy into the simulation. Jake split their team into 2 groups. Brock and Senna would create a diversion by attacking one side of the enemy base with maximum firepower. Meanwhile, Jake and Nyx would sneak in from the opposite side to reach the civilians. The timing had to be perfect. If the diversion started too early, the enemy would have time to prepare for the real assault. If it started too late, Jake and Nyx would be caught in the open. Now, Jake whispered into his communicator. Explosions erupted on the far side of the enemy base. Brock and Cena's attack looked like a full assault, causing the enemy to shift most of their forces to defend that position. Jake and Nix moved quickly through the abandoned sections of the base. They reached the civilian holding area just as the enemy began to realize they were facing a diversion. "Move fast," Jake told the simulated civilians. "Stay low and follow exactly where we go." They extracted all 12 civilians without a single casualty. When the simulation ended, their team had achieved a perfect success rating. Other teams in the class had failed completely or managed to save only a few civilians at great cost. Jake's team was the only one to achieve total success. "Excellent work," Professor Catherine announced. "Mr. Miller, explain your strategy." Jake stood up. "We used their expectations against them. They expected us to attack where we looked strongest, so we attacked where we looked weakest instead." "And where did you learn this approach?" the professor asked, watching Jake's face carefully. "It seemed like the logical thing to do," Jake replied. Zara raised her hand. "Professor, I must point out that this strategy only worked because the enemy was programmed to behave predictably. Real enemies would not fall for such simple tricks." "Perhaps," Professor Catherine said, "but the mission parameters were designed to reflect real combat situations. The enemy behavior was based on actual military doctrine. Then the doctrine must be flawed," Zara insisted. "No competent military force would be fooled by such basic deception." Jake looked at her with what might have been amusement. "You are probably right. It was just a simulation." But Professor Catherine noticed something else. During the simulation, Jake had moved and communicated like someone with extensive combat experience. His commands were precise, his timing was perfect, and his calm under pressure was remarkable. After class, the professor made a decision. He contacted his old friend Admiral Voss of the Galactic Defense Council. If anyone could access Jake's real records, it would be someone at that level. "Catherine, old friend," Admiral Voss said when the call connected. "It has been too long. What can I do for you?" "I need information about a student named Jake Miller, human, from Earth, currently attending Stellar Academy." There was a long pause. "Why do you need this information?" "I am his professor. There are questions about his background that need answering." Another pause. "I cannot discuss this over normal channels. Can you come to my office tomorrow? Is it that serious?" "Let me put it this way," Admiral Voss said carefully. "Jake Miller is not just any student, and you are not just any professor asking about him. We should meet in person." Professor Catherine agreed to the meeting, but he was now more curious than ever. What could a simple human exchange student have done to warrant such secrecy? The next day, Lin Xiao made her own breakthrough. She had been accessing archived news reports from Earth when she found a brief mention of Jake Miller in a military honors ceremony. The article was short and gave few details, but it mentioned that he had received a medal for exceptional service during the Outer Rim conflicts. "Outer Rim conflicts," Zara said when Lin showed her the article. "I have never heard of that." "Neither had I," Lin admitted. "But look at the date. This was only 2 years ago. Jake would have been 20 when this happened." "So he is a veteran," Zara said dismissively. "That explains why he knows some military tactics. But it does not change the fact that he is still intellectually inferior." Lin was not satisfied. "Zara, what if we are wrong about him? What if there is more to Jake Miller than we think?" "Do not be ridiculous," Zara replied. "He is just a human with some basic military training. That does not make him special." But Lin was beginning to have doubts. She had seen Jake's performance in simulations, and it was better than just basic training. There was something about the way he approached problems that seemed almost instinctive. As the investigations continued, Jake remained focused on his studies. He seemed unaware of the growing interest in his background, or perhaps he simply did not care. Either way, he continued to treat everyone with the same quiet respect, even as they tried to uncover his secrets. Professor Catherine walked through the corridors of Galactic Defense Command headquarters, his footsteps echoing in the massive hallways. Admiral Voss had requested this meeting in person, which meant the information about Jake Miller was more sensitive than he had imagined. Admiral Voss was a distinguished Altarian with silver skin and wise eyes. He had served in the galactic military for over 60 years and was known for his discretion and judgment. "Thank you for coming, old friend," Admiral Voss said as they sat in his secured office. "What I am about to tell you cannot leave this room, I understand," Professor Catherine replied. "But I need to know about Jake Miller. His behavior in class does not match his apparent background." Admiral Voss touched a control panel, and the office's security shields activated. Jake Miller is not just any exchange student. He is the son of Admiral Kate Miller, one of the most decorated human officers in galactic history. Professor Catherine's eyes widened. Kate Miller, the commander who led the defense of Proxima Station, the same. But that is not the most important part. Admiral Voss paused, choosing his words carefully. Jake Miller himself is a decorated combat veteran. He served with distinction in the Outer Rim conflicts 2 years ago. "What exactly were the Outer Rim conflicts?" Professor Catherine asked. "I have heard the name, but no details." "That is because the information is classified at the highest levels," Admiral Voss explained. The Outer Rim conflicts were humanity's first major test as a galactic military power. The hostile Drakmar Empire launched a massive invasion of the outer colonies. Admiral Voss brought up a holographic display showing star charts and battle formations. The Drakmar had superior numbers and technology. Every military analyst predicted that the human colonies would fall within weeks. But they did not fall, Professor Catherine observed. No, they did not. Human forces not only held their ground, but launched a counterattack that destroyed the Drakmar fleet completely. It was one of the most decisive victories in recent galactic history, and Jake Miller was part of this. He was more than part of it. At age 20, he was the youngest human ever to receive the Galactic Cross for Valor. His tactical innovations saved thousands of lives and turned the tide of several key battles. Professor Catherine sat back in his chair, processing this information. Then why is he at the academy as a simple exchange student? Because he is not there as a simple exchange student, Admiral Voss said. Jake Miller is part of a classified program to train the next generation of galactic military leaders. His apparent mediocrity is carefully maintained to avoid drawing attention to human capabilities. You mean he is deliberately hiding his abilities? Exactly. The Galactic Defense Council wants to observe how other species interact with humans when they believe we are inferior. Jake's mission is to gather intelligence while appearing to be just another student. Professor Catherine thought about Jake's behavior in class, his calm responses to provocation, his precise tactical thinking, his detailed knowledge of military history. Everything made sense now. "How much is he holding back?" the professor asked. "Significantly. Jake Miller's true capabilities are far beyond what he has demonstrated. He has been trained by the best military minds in the galaxy and has combat experience that most academy graduates will never possess. And his knowledge of the Proxima Station battle," Admiral Voss smiled grimly. "He did not just read about it. He studied it extensively with his mother, who commanded the defense. Admiral Kate Miller personally trained her son in the tactics she used during that siege." "What about the other students? Do they have any idea?" "None at all. Even the human student, Lin Xiao, does not know Jake's true identity. The cover story is so complete that only a few people in the entire galaxy know the truth." Professor Catherine realized the implications. So when that Altarian student mocks him for being primitive and inferior, she is insulting one of the most capable military minds of his generation, Admiral Voss finished. Jake has been ordered to maintain his cover no matter what provocation he faces. That explains his remarkable self-control, Professor Catherine said. Most young beings would have reacted angrily to such treatment. Jake Miller has faced enemy fire and made life-or-death decisions that saved entire colonies. A few insults from fellow students are not going to break his composure. The professor had one more question. Why are you telling me this? Surely maintaining his cover is more important than satisfying my curiosity. Admiral Voss became serious. Because we may need your help soon. Intelligence suggests that Drachmer survivors are planning revenge attacks on human targets. The Academy could be one of them. You think the Academy is in danger? We think Jake Miller is in danger. If the Drachmer discover his true identity, they will stop at nothing to eliminate him. He represents everything they failed to defeat in the Outer Rim conflicts. Professor Catherine felt a chill. What do you want me to do? Watch him carefully. If anything unusual happens, contact me immediately, and under no circumstances should you reveal what you know to anyone else. As Professor Catherine left the headquarters, his mind was spinning with this new information. Jake Miller was not the simple exchange student he appeared to be. He was a war hero whose true capabilities were hidden behind a carefully maintained facade of mediocrity. Back at the Academy, Lin Zhao was making her own discoveries. She had finally gained access to classified Earth military databases through her connections in the Luna colonies. What she found shocked her. Jake Miller's service record was extensive, despite his young age. He had participated in 17 major engagements during the Outer Rim conflicts and had never lost a battle. His tactical innovations had been studied and adopted by military academies across human space. This cannot be right, Lin whispered to herself as she read through the records. If this is true, then Jake is not just a veteran. He is a military genius. She found records of battles where Jake had commanded entire fleets, despite being barely 20 years old. He had developed new strategies that combined human adaptability with alien technologies in ways that no one had thought possible. The more Lin read, the more she realized how wrong she had been about Jake. This was not some mediocre student from a backwater colony. This was someone who had helped save the galaxy from invasion. She started to understand why Jake never fought back against Zara's insults. He had faced real enemies in real battles. The opinions of fellow students must seem trivial by comparison. Lin made a decision. She would not tell Zara what she had learned, but she would stop helping with the investigation. Jake Miller deserved better treatment than he was receiving, and she would not be part of making his life more difficult. Meanwhile, Jake continued his classes normally, unaware that his secrets were being uncovered. He participated in discussions, completed assignments, and treated everyone with the same quiet respect. If he knew that people were investigating his background, he showed no signs of concern. In tactical analysis class, Professor Catherine found himself watching Jake with new eyes. Every comment the young human made showed deeper understanding than he had previously revealed. His questions were more sophisticated than those of students who had been at the Academy for years. Mr. Miller, the professor said during one lesson, you seem to have strong opinions about siege warfare tactics. Have you studied this subject extensively? Jake looked up from his notes. Only what everyone studies, Professor. Historical battles and theoretical applications. But Professor Catherine noticed something else. When Jake discussed military tactics, his voice carried a subtle authority that came from experience, not just study. He spoke like someone who had actually commanded troops in battle. Zara, oblivious to these undercurrents, continued her campaign against Jake. She had become convinced that exposing his inadequacies would benefit everyone at the Academy. I still think he is hiding something, she told her friends. No one can be that calm unless they are either extremely confident or extremely stupid. Maybe he is just stupid, suggested Cree, the Zephyrian student. No, Zara said thoughtfully. I have seen stupid students before. Jake Miller is something else. I just cannot figure out what. As the investigation continued, Jake remained focused on his mission. He was here to learn about other species and their capabilities, not to impress anyone with his own achievements. The mockery and isolation were uncomfortable, but they were also useful for his real purpose. He was beginning to understand how other species viewed humans, and that information would be valuable when he returned to Earth. The galaxy saw humans as primitive and violent, but they had no idea of humanity's true potential. Soon, Jake thought, that would change. But for now, he would continue to play his role as the mediocre exchange student, no matter how much it cost him personally. The attack came without warning during the third week of classes. Jake was in the library studying when the Academy's emergency alarms began blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the building as automated voices announced that hostile forces had breached the outer defenses. Students panicked immediately. Many had never experienced real danger before, and the sudden shift from academic routine to life-threatening crisis overwhelmed them. Some screamed, others ran in random directions, and a few simply froze in place. Jake looked up from his books and listened to the alarm patterns. 3 short bursts, followed by 2 long ones. That was the code for external assault with unknown enemy strength. He had heard similar alarms before, but in very different circumstances. "Everyone stay calm," Jake said in a normal voice, but somehow it carried across the chaos. "Move toward the emergency exits in groups. Do not run." Most students ignored him, but a few closest to his table stopped panicking and began moving more deliberately. Jake stood up and walked to the library's main terminal to check the security feeds. The attackers were Drakmar, he realized immediately. Their distinctive black armor and energy weapons were unmistakable. Jake had seen them before, but never expected to encounter them again at a peaceful academy. "Why are they here?" whispered Sina, the Zephyrian student who had been on Jake's simulation team. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. The Drakmar were supposed to be extinct after the Outer Rim conflicts. If survivors had found the academy, they must be here for a specific reason. Then he realized the truth. They were here for him. "Everyone listen to me," Jake said, his voice carrying new authority. "The emergency exits are compromised. We need to move to the central building, where the defensive shields are strongest." "How do you know that?" asked Brock, the Krathari warrior. "Because I have seen attacks like this before," Jake replied simply. Professor Catherine arrived at the library just as Jake was organizing the students into groups. The professor had been in communication with Admiral Voss and knew that the attack was exactly what they had feared. "Mr. Miller," Professor Catherine said quietly, "I think you should know that your cover may be compromised." Jake nodded grimly. "I figured that out already. The question is whether we can get everyone to safety before they find me." "We?" Professor Catherine asked. "I am not going to let innocent people die because of my presence here," Jake said firmly. "Professor, I need you to coordinate the evacuation. Get everyone to the central building's emergency shelter. What are you going to do?" "Buy you time," Jake replied, checking his communication device. "I am calling for backup, but it will take time to arrive." As if responding to his words, explosions echoed through the academy. The Drakmar were advancing methodically, destroying defensive positions, and forcing academy security forces to retreat. Jake moved through the panicking students with calm efficiency. He organized them into groups, designated leaders, and gave clear instructions for reaching safety. Students who had mocked him just hours earlier now followed his orders without question. Zara found herself in one of Jake's groups, along with Lin Xiao and several other students. She watched in amazement as the quiet human took control of the situation. "Stay low and move quickly," Jake instructed them. "If you see Drakmar soldiers, do not try to fight them. Hide and wait for them to pass." "How do you know so much about enemy tactics?" Zara asked, her usual arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. Experience, Jake replied without elaborating. They moved through the academy's corridors, avoiding the main hallways where combat was heaviest. Jake seemed to know exactly where the enemy would be and how to avoid them at one point. They reached a junction where they could hear Drachmer voices just around the corner. Jake held up his hand for silence and listened carefully. They are looking for someone specific, he whispered. Human, male, about my age. They have a description. They are looking for you, Lin Xiao realized. Why? Because I am not who you think I am, Jake said quietly. Before anyone could ask more questions, 3 Drachmer soldiers rounded the corner. They saw the group of students and raised their weapons. Jake stepped forward, placing himself between the soldiers and the students. Get to the shelter, he ordered without looking back. We cannot leave you, Zara protested. Yes, you can, Jake replied, and you will. The lead Drachmer soldier spoke in accented Galactic Common. Jake Miller, of Earth. You will come with us. I do not think so, Jake said calmly. What happened next shocked everyone watching. Jake moved faster than anyone had ever seen him move, disarming the first soldier and using his weapon to eliminate the other 2. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. How did you do that? Brock asked in amazement. Training, Jake replied, checking the corridor for more enemies. Now move. As they reached the central building, Jake's communication device activated. Admiral Voss's voice came through clearly. Jake, we have ships incoming. Can you hold position for 20 minutes? Copy that, Admiral, Jake replied. I will hold as long as necessary. The students around him stared in shock. Jake Miller, the mediocre exchange student they had known for weeks, was talking to admirals and handling military crises like a veteran commander. Who are you really? Zara asked. Jake looked at her with what might have been sympathy. I am exactly who I said I was, Jake Miller from Earth. I just never mentioned what I did before I came here. And what did you do? I was a soldier. Professor Catherine arrived with another group of students. The shelter is secure, he reported, but the Drachmer are advancing on this position. How many? Jake asked. Approximately 50 soldiers, plus support equipment. Jake nodded thoughtfully. We can hold them for 20 minutes if we use the building's defensive systems properly. Professor Catherine asked. I need volunteers, Jake said, addressing the assembled students. This is not a simulation. People could die. To everyone's surprise, Zara stepped forward first. I will help. You do not understand, Jake said. These are real enemies with real weapons. This is not like our classes. I understand perfectly, Zara replied. I have been wrong about you, about humans, about everything. Let me help fix that. Other students began volunteering. Brock, Nix, Sina, even Lin Xiao. They were terrified, but they were also inspired by Jake's calm leadership. All right, Jake said. Here is what we are going to do. He outlined a defensive plan that utilized the Academy's automated systems, student volunteers, and the building's architecture. It was complex, risky, and required precise timing. The goal is not to defeat them, Jake explained. The goal is to delay them until reinforcements arrive. As the Drachmer assault began, Jake's plan unfolded perfectly. Students who had spent weeks studying theoretical tactics found themselves applying real, military strategy under his guidance. Zara operated communications equipment, coordinating between different defensive positions. She watched Jake command the defense with growing amazement. This was not the work of a simple soldier. This was military genius in action. The battle lasted exactly 18 minutes. When Galactic Defense Forces arrived, they found the Academy's defenders in perfect formation. The Drachmer assault completely stalled. Admiral Voss personally led the relief force. He found Jake in the Central Command Center, calmly directing final defensive operations. Report, Admiral Voss ordered. 53 enemy soldiers eliminated or captured, Jake replied. 0 friendly casualties. The Academy is secure. Excellent work, Commander Miller. The students around Jake went silent. Commander Miller. Zara stepped forward. Admiral, who is Jake Miller really? Admiral Voss looked at Jake, who nodded permission. Commander Jake Miller is one of the youngest and most decorated officers in galactic history. He led the human forces that defeated the Drakmar Empire in the Outer Rim conflicts. But he is just a student, Zara protested weakly. No, Admiral Voss said. He is an officer conducting a classified mission. His apparent mediocrity was carefully maintained to study how other species interact with humans. Jake turned to address his classmates. I apologize for the deception. I was ordered to maintain my cover, but I never intended for anyone to be hurt by it. Zara felt overwhelming shame. I mocked you. I called you primitive and inferior. I said humans were not fit for military leadership. You were expressing honest opinions based on limited information, Jake replied gently. That was actually useful for my mission. But I was wrong about everything. You were wrong about me, Jake corrected. But you were not wrong to have high standards, or to expect excellence from your classmates. Lin Xiao spoke up. Jake, why did you let us treat you that way? You could have stopped at any time. Because I was here to learn about you, not to impress you, Jake said. Your reactions to what you thought was a typical human told me more about galactic attitudes than any amount of formal study could have. Professor Kethron approached Jake. What will you do now that your cover is blown? Return to Earth for new assignment, Jake replied. My mission here is complete. And what did you learn? Zara asked. Jake considered his answer carefully. I learned that most species in the galaxy underestimate humans because they judge us by our apparent weaknesses rather than our hidden strengths. But I also learned that this misunderstanding works both ways. What do you mean? Humans often assume that other species look down on us because they feel superior. But the truth is more complex. You mock what you do not understand, just as we become defensive about what we think you cannot appreciate. As the crisis ended and Normal Academy life resumed, Jake prepared to leave. His fellow students treated him with new respect, but also with some sadness. They had learned that their assumptions about humans were wrong, but they had also lost a classmate who had taught them important lessons. Zara approached him on his last day. Jake, I want to apologize again, not just for how I treated you, but for how I thought about your entire species. Apology accepted, Jake said. But remember, I am just one human. Do not make the mistake of assuming all humans are like me, just as you should not have assumed all humans were inferior. What should I assume then? Jake smiled. Assume that every being you meet has hidden depths that you have not yet discovered. Judge them by their actions, not by your preconceptions. As Jake Miller left Stellar Academy, he carried with him valuable intelligence about galactic attitudes toward humanity. But he also left behind students who would never again underestimate a species based on limited understanding. Zara went on to become one of the galaxy's leading experts on human military tactics. She often told her students about the quiet exchange, student who had taught her that wisdom could come from the most unexpected sources. And sometimes, late at night, she wondered how many other mediocre students around the galaxy might actually be heroes in disguise.